The warm glow of late summer filtered through the tall oaks lining the fairground, where laughter, applause, and the flash of cameras filled the air. It was the annual Little Miss Magnolia pageant, a highlight of the small Georgia town's calendar. On stage, 7-year-old Emily Grace Whitmore stood beaming, her golden curls catching the light, her pastel blue dress swirling as she twirled for the judges. The crowd adored her, everyone did. She was sweet, polite, and heartbreakingly pretty, with a stage presence beyond her years. Her mother, Diane, watched proudly from the wings, clutching a bouquet of roses and mouthing encouragement. Emily waved at her, dimples deepening, before blowing a kiss to the audience. The show ended in cheers, and Emily took second place. She didn't seem disappointed, but her mother looked momentarily tight-lipped, then recovered and offered a smile. Backstage, Emily was last seen chatting with another contestant near the dressing rooms. Diane stepped away for just a moment, to take a phone call, she later told police, and when she returned, her daughter was gone. At first, it was a mild panic. They searched the dressing room, then the bathroom, the snack tent. No one remembered seeing her leave. Her tiara had been left behind on the vanity, next to a small half-eaten granola bar. That wasn't like Emily, she loved that crown. By nightfall, the mood had shifted from confusion to dread. Flashlights scanned the woods behind the fairgrounds. Police arrived and interviewed the pageant organizers. Rumors flew, was it a kidnapping? Did she run away? Could someone she knew have taken her? Diane collapsed into sobs, her makeup streaked with tears. The sheriff's department issued an Amber Alert. But no tire tracks, no witnesses, no screams. Emily had vanished as if into thin air. A town held its breath, clinging to hope, as darkness settled over the stage where she had once shined. In the days following Emily Grace Whitmore's disappearance, the town of Brookhaven transformed from a sleepy southern suburb into the epicenter of a frantic search. Flyers bearing her picture, big blue eyes, honey blonde curls, and a shy, dimpled smile, were plastered on lampposts, shop windows, and church doors. "Have you seen me?" the posters asked in bold red letters. Volunteers flooded the streets. Neighbors who'd never spoken before formed search parties, combing the woods, rivers, and backroads, calling her name into the thick, humid air. The local fire department opened its station to coordinate efforts. Local businesses donated water, snacks, and walkie-talkies. A nearby billboard was changed overnight to display Emily's face and a hotline number. Reporters descended quickly. Satellite vans lined the main road, their long antennas pointed at the sky. Local anchors did stand-ups in front of Emily's elementary school and the fairgrounds. National networks soon followed. Everyone wanted a piece of the tragedy. The camera lights lit up Diane Whitmore's exhausted face as she pleaded into microphones, holding the stuffed rabbit Emily slept with every night. "Please bring my baby home," she said, her voice breaking. Her husband, Tom, stood beside her, silent and pale, his hand on her back like he was trying to keep her from falling apart. Rumors, too, began to bloom. Whispers that maybe Diane had left Emily alone too long backstage. That Tom had been unusually cold during interviews. One neighbor claimed Emily had been seen talking to a man in a red truck weeks earlier. Others said she'd sometimes come to school with bruises. Police investigated every tip, dozens a day, but nothing led anywhere. The red truck never materialized. The bruises were dismissed by the family doctor as normal roughhousing. Still, suspicion hung in the air, heavy and unspeakable. Some began pointing fingers at Lester Cray, the odd neighbor who lived alone in a crumbling house 2 blocks from the Whitmores. He'd once called the police about strange noises in the neighborhood and was known for muttering to himself on walks. When asked by detectives, he claimed he heard a child screaming that night but couldn't remember the time or direction. They searched his property but found nothing. Diane called him a creep on camera. Others said he was just lonely. Weeks passed, and the posters began to fade in the sun. The search efforts thinned. People returned to work, to school, to their routines, but a quiet unease lingered. Emily's disappearance had left a fracture in the community, a silent fear that something dark had walked among them that night. And worse, might still be there. By the summer of 1997, the once burning urgency surrounding Emily Grace Whitmore's disappearance had dimmed to a cold, heavy silence. Her pink bicycle, once left untouched in the garage as a shrine of sorts, was finally moved into storage. The flowers that had been laid outside the Whitmore home each year on the anniversary of her vanishing were fewer now, their petals browning faster than before. The yellow ribbons, faded to a pale ivory, still clung to mailboxes and tree trunks, though some had quietly been removed. Life in Brookhaven had marched on, but for the Whitmores, time had stopped on that warm August night 3 years ago. Their home, once filled with laughter and piano lessons and the scent of baked cinnamon rolls, had grown quiet. Diane had stopped baking altogether. Tom, once the kind of father who coached Little League and waved cheerfully at neighbors, had become a man of silence. He sat for hours in the living room, staring at the TV without watching it. Conversations between them were brief, sometimes sharp. Grief had created space, and then distance. Diane spent more time away from home, volunteering at shelters, avoiding the empty bedroom upstairs. She stopped attending the support group she once relied on, unable to hear other stories when her own had no ending. The house itself began to show signs of neglect, peeling paint on the porch railings, a cracked window never repaired, a patchy lawn. But it wasn't the exterior that weighed most heavily, it was the attic. No one had gone up there since that first chaotic week, when police scoured every inch of the house for clues. After that, Diane had nailed the door shut herself. "Nothing good comes from opening ghosts," she had whispered. She meant it literally. The attic was where Emily had once played dress-up, stacking pageant tiaras beside boxes of Christmas lights. After the disappearance, the sight of her things untouched and still filled with her scent became unbearable. The door stayed closed, like a vault guarding a version of life they could never get back. That spring, Diane made the decision. They would sell the house. Tom didn't argue. Packing was slow and painful. Each item brought a memory, some too sharp to hold. They boxed up Emily's room last, both of them working in silence, folding her tiny dresses with shaking hands. The attic remained untouched. "Leave it for the new owners," Diane said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Let someone else decide what to do with it." And so, the Whitmores left the only home their daughter had ever known, closing the door not just on a house, but on hope they had quietly buried long ago. The house on Wisteria Lane sat quiet again, but not empty. A new family had moved in, Daniel and Marissa Powell, along with their 13-year-old daughter, Maddie. To them, it was a fresh start, an affordable home with charm, space, and good schools. The realtor had mentioned the incident years ago, but only in passing. A tragedy, but nothing unusual in small towns, she had said, brushing it off with the kind of practiced detachment people use when trying to soften something deeply unsettling. The Powells signed the paperwork anyway. They had come from a bustling city, desperate for slower days and safer streets. Marissa painted the living room yellow. Daniel trimmed the hedges. They filled the air with laughter, new furniture, and the smell of cinnamon candles. Maddie, curious and quiet by nature, explored every inch of the old house with a sense of wonder. She'd always had a taste for the eerie, mystery books, old films, strange tales told under blankets by flashlight. She loved the creaks in the stairs, the antique knobs on the doors, even the way the floor sloped slightly in the hallway. But what intrigued her most was the attic. She noticed it on the first day, the sealed entrance at the end of the second-floor hallway. The trapdoor was painted over, the edges rough with old nails, as if someone had tried hard to keep it shut. One afternoon, while her parents were out shopping, Maddie stood under the trapdoor with a flashlight. She dragged a chair from her room and climbed up, fingers prying at the edge. With effort, and a loud crack, she broke the seal. Dust rained down in soft plumes. The smell was old and dry, like forgotten paper and wood rot. She hoisted herself into the narrow crawlspace, her flashlight's beam cutting across boxes, cobwebs, and insulation. It wasn't a large attic, more of a wedge-shaped crawl area lined with support beams. Everything was covered in layers of grime. As she inched forward, something caught her eye. In the far corner, behind a pile of broken-down boxes, sat a small ceramic cereal bowl with faded cartoon bears along the rim. Inside it were dry crumbs, old, fossilized bits of something. Beside it lay a dusty toy unicorn with a torn pink ribbon around its neck and a tarnished pageant sash folded neatly underneath it. The sash read, "Little Miss Magnolia 1993, in gold script, the letters dulled with age. Maddie's breath caught in her throat. It was out of place, too deliberate to be random clutter. The bowl wasn't what scared her. It was what was under it. As she moved it aside, she saw something taped to the floor, a crumpled drawing made with crayons, childlike and shaky. It showed a girl with blonde hair behind what looked like bars, with the words, "I'm still here," scrawled beneath in pink. Maddie's hand trembled as she backed away, heart thudding like a drum in her ears. There was no mistaking what she had just found. This attic wasn't empty. It held a secret, buried and silent for years. And now, that secret was beginning to whisper again. Maddie didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying what she had found in the attic, over and over, every detail sharper with each passing hour. The bowl, the unicorn, the drawing, "I'm still here." The words crawled under her skin. She tried telling her parents, but they had brushed it off gently, distracted by unpacking and unaware of the fear in her voice. "Probably just old stuff the last family left behind," her mother said, ruffling Maddie's hair as if it would calm her down. But Maddie knew better. She felt something in that attic, like the house had been holding its breath, waiting. The next morning, she returned. This time with gloves, a dust mask, and a sharper flashlight. The sun was barely up. She pushed through the cobwebs and insulation, reaching the same far corner. But as she looked more carefully now, something about the wall behind the cereal bowl seemed off. It didn't match the rest of the attic. The wooden panels were newer, less dusty, like they'd been handled more recently than the rest. Maddie knocked gently. Hollow. Her pulse quickened. She knocked again, harder. This time, a faint echo bounced back. Her breath hitched. She rushed downstairs to the garage, digging through boxes until she found her dad's toolkit. Returning with a small crowbar and hammer, she knelt in front of the wall and began to pry. The nails were old but stubborn. Wood splintered. A gust of stale, trapped air escaped as a panel finally gave way, revealing a dark, cramped passage beyond, no wider than a crawl space. She hesitated, then aimed her flashlight inside. The beam fell on a tiny room, barely 4 feet high and 5 feet long. The walls were lined with old blankets, a few children's books, and a cracked plastic mirror. On the floor, a small mattress lay beneath more forgotten toys, crayons, a notebook, a stuffed rabbit missing an ear. Maddie's chest tightened. This wasn't storage. It was a hiding place. A place where someone had lived. The crayon drawings on the wall told a silent story. A child crying, a dark figure outside a door, a window drawn over and over again with bars. Each picture more frantic, more desperate. She stepped in slowly, crouching. The floor creaked faintly under her weight, as if unused to being touched after so long. At the far end of the space, she found something even more chilling. A worn-out calendar from 1994, with the month of August circled over and over in red marker. On the last page, scrawled in the same handwriting as the drawing she'd found under the bowl, was one final message: "He comes when it's dark. Don't make noise." Maddie stumbled back out of the crawlspace, heart hammering. This was no forgotten playroom. Someone had kept a child here. For how long, she couldn't tell, but the details were undeniable. She ran to her parents again, dragging them to the attic. This time, her panic broke through their skepticism. Her father's face drained of color the moment he saw the hidden room. Her mother gasped and clutched her chest. Within an hour, the police were there. Flashlights scanned every inch. Evidence bags were filled. A detective spoke in hushed tones to Maddie, praising her bravery while scribbling furiously in a notebook. Forensics teams sealed off the attic. The detective later confirmed the truth that chilled the entire house to its foundation. This was indeed connected to the disappearance of Emily Grace Whitmore. And someone, perhaps more than one person, had gone to great lengths to make sure it was never found. The house was no longer just a home, it was now an active crime scene. Yellow tape stretched across the stairwell, officers moved through rooms with gloved hands and clipped voices, and Maddie watched from the porch, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. The attic had given up its secret, and now the past was clawing its way back into the present. For the first time in years, the name Emily Grace Whitmore was spoken not in memorials or quiet regret, but with urgency, with purpose. Something had been found. Something real. Detectives confirmed that several items in the hidden attic room matched those catalogued in the original investigation, most notably the unicorn toy and the Little Miss Magnolia sash. But the real breakthrough came 2 days later when the forensic team called in a DNA rush test. Hair samples found on the mattress, along with fibers from clothing in the crawlspace, were sent to the lab. The results were chilling, a positive match. The child who had lived in that small, dark space was Emily. The news sent a shockwave through Brookhaven. The local paper ran a front-page headline in bold black letters: "Emily Whitmore was here." The television crews returned, their vans once again lining the streets. Reporters whispered about the room, the drawings, the bowl of crumbs. But what they didn't know, and what the investigators barely wanted to admit, was even darker. Emily had not disappeared in a single night. She had been kept there. Hidden, caged like a forgotten animal, in the walls of her own home for what the forensics suggested could have been months. Possibly longer. One detective, grizzled and tight-lipped, said quietly to Maddie's parents, "Whoever did this had access. They didn't just break in. They knew the house." That theory grew stronger when a closer inspection of the attic structure revealed a false wall that connected, through a narrow passageway, to the neighboring property, the crumbling old house that had once belonged to Lester Cray. Lester had died 2 years ago of a stroke, alone and without family. But he had been a name in the original investigation, someone who claimed to have heard screaming. Now, the evidence began to reframe that statement. A rusted access panel in his attic aligned almost perfectly with the hidden space in the Whitmore house. Investigators believed he had cut through during renovations in the late 80s, when the homes were being retrofitted for insulation. It had been overlooked for decades. They searched his now abandoned home and found faint traces, old footprints, strands of blonde hair, and one final, haunting clue: a child's drawing pinned behind a wall panel showing 2 houses connected by a tunnel, with a stick figure standing between them. What happened to Emily after she left that crawlspace remained a mystery. There were no signs of her in the neighbor's home beyond what had already been discovered. The last entry in the notebook found with her belongings simply read, "He's gone. I'm alone. I don't know where to go." Had she escaped? Had someone taken her from there and hidden her again? Or had she found a way out, only to disappear into a world too big and too dangerous for a little girl already broken by fear? One thing was certain: Emily had survived longer than anyone believed possible. But whether she was still alive now, no one could say. The weeks following the discovery were filled with a tense, electric kind of hope, a fragile thing, trembling in the hands of a town that had once already mourned. Investigators reopened the case with renewed energy, combing through old files, re-interviewing witnesses, even reaching out to retired officers who had worked on the original disappearance. Diane and Tom Whitmore were brought in quietly under police escort, their faces drawn with shock and disbelief as they stood in front of the very attic where their daughter had once lived, hidden only feet above them. Diane collapsed when she saw the drawings. She recognized the handwriting, the crude but unmistakable pictures of Emily's old bedroom, her favorite stuffed rabbit, the sun drawn with too many rays. "She was trying to tell us," Diane whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of 3 years of guilt and grief. Tom stood frozen, one hand against the attic doorframe, unable to speak. His eyes were locked on the narrow mattress, the small items that had belonged to a little girl who'd been crying for help just above their heads. Public pressure grew. The FBI stepped in, bringing cadaver dogs, thermal imaging equipment, and specialists in child abduction psychology. The assumption had shifted. Emily hadn't vanished into the night, she had been stolen and hidden in plain sight. The town watched with rapt attention as authorities announced a new theory: Emily had been kept in the attic by someone with access, and when that space became too risky, too close to discovery, she had been moved. The most likely route: through the false passage into Lester Cray's house. And from there, no one knew. But then a breakthrough came, almost by accident. A box of old cassette tapes was found in Lester's basement, buried beneath scrap metal and mildewed books. Most were blank, but one was labeled in faded ink, EW, August-November, '94. Investigators held their breath as they pressed play. Static filled the room. Then, faintly, the sound of breathing. A child's voice, Emily's, singing softly, almost inaudibly. A lullaby. Then silence. Then, a man's voice. Calm, low, unmistakably adult. "Shish, Emily. Be good and stay quiet. You know what happens when you make noise." The tape was damning. It confirmed not only that Emily had survived well beyond her disappearance but that she had been actively held, watched, and manipulated. Experts listening to the tapes detected signs of trauma bonding, Emily responding with, "Yes, sir," in a small, subdued tone. It was now clear that Lester Cray hadn't simply known something, he had been directly involved. But with him dead, any opportunity for answers had died too. What investigators needed now was proof of what happened after those tapes ended. And who else, if anyone, had helped him? One theory began to emerge from the shadows: Lester may not have acted alone. Old bank records revealed regular cash withdrawals made by him in the months following Emily's disappearance, amounts too large for a man on disability to justify. A neighbor recalled seeing a younger man visiting Cray during that time, someone no one could identify. Sketches were drawn, questions asked, but no solid lead appeared. And yet, in the tape's final moments, a name was whispered. Barely audible, but clear enough for the audio tech to isolate. "Don't tell Martin. He gets mad." The name was unknown to the investigation, until it wasn't. A Martin Greenfield had once been a maintenance contractor hired to fix water damage in both the Cray and Whitmore homes. His name had been overlooked for years, lost in paperwork. Now, with this new information, he became the center of the investigation. The hunt was on, not just for a missing girl, but for a man who may have taken her away all over again. And somewhere, the question no one wanted to ask began to echo in every quiet moment. What if Emily was still alive? And what if someone still had her? The search for Martin Greenfield reignited a storm of urgency and dread. His last known address had long been abandoned, a small trailer in a rural part of Alabama overgrown with weeds and cluttered with rusted furniture. But inside, investigators found eerie remnants: children's shoes too small to be his, a cracked snow globe with a ballerina inside, and most disturbing of all, a single photograph of a blonde girl, no older than 6, standing stiffly in front of a motel room door. The image was grainy, her expression hollow, but her eyes, they were unmistakable. It was Emily. A few years older, thinner, but alive. The photo had a timestamp: May 1996. Nearly 2 years after she was taken. The discovery launched a nationwide manhunt. Greenfield's name and face flashed across television screens, websites, post offices. Tips flooded in, sightings, guesses, wild stories. Most led nowhere. But then, a break came from a woman in Kentucky. She'd worked the overnight shift at a roadside diner off I-64. She remembered a quiet man who came in every few weeks with a pale, withdrawn girl he called Sarah. He was protective, controlling. The girl never spoke. She only ever ordered toast. The woman remembered because of the way Sarah looked at her, not with fear, but with desperate, silent pleading. Authorities traced the timeline, and it fit. Surveillance footage from the diner showed them. The timestamp was from 1997, after the discovery of the hidden attic room. Emily had been moved again, just before the Whitmores sold the house. Greenfield had known. Maybe he saw the signs, heard the new family moving in. And like a ghost sensing danger, he vanished once more, taking Emily with him. Then, just when hope was beginning to wane again, everything changed. A call came in from a hospital in West Virginia. A young woman had been brought in by a truck driver who found her wandering barefoot along a forested highway. She was dazed, severely malnourished, covered in old bruises and fresh scratches. She had no ID, refused to speak, and flinched at every sudden movement. Nurses assumed she was a runaway. But then one of them noticed something: a faded pageant scar on her collarbone, just like the one Emily Grace Whitmore had been known to have. They ran her fingerprints. The match came back within hours. It was her, Emily, 22 years old, alive. The news swept the country in a wave of disbelief and cathartic relief. Reporters camped outside the hospital. Candlelight vigils lit up in Brookhaven. The Whitmores were rushed by state officials to be reunited with their daughter, though doctors cautioned against overwhelming her. Emily hadn't spoken a word since being found. Her eyes darted constantly, her hands trembled, and she sometimes screamed in her sleep. Years of captivity had hollowed her, shaped her into someone who had learned to survive in silence. Diane held her for the first time in over 2 decades in a quiet hospital room. Emily didn't recognize her at first. But then, slowly, her fingers reached up and touched her mother's face, like trying to remember a dream long forgotten. Tom wept quietly in the corner, too shattered to speak. In the days that followed, the truth began to trickle out, painful, fragmented, but real. Emily had been kept in at least 3 different locations. She had been told her parents were dead. She had been punished for trying to escape, for crying, for speaking too loudly. But she had never stopped drawing. Her notebook, found in her backpack at the hospital, was filled with sketches of a girl behind bars, of stars she had never seen, of doorways she couldn't open. On the last page, a single sentence was written in trembling ink. I never forgot my name. Martin Greenfield, however, was still missing. And somewhere out there, a man who had stolen a child, her voice, and her future, was still free. But Emily was no longer hidden. She had been found. And the truth, after so many years buried in darkness, had finally come home.